Right. Here we go then. Here we go. Back to that mysterious item of chapter 2. Now we're on to Matthew 4, the fulfillment of Galilee of the Gentiles. Now what does that mean, right? First off in this chapter though, let's take a look at those great temptations of Jesus. Hardly as tempting as the one in the Garden of Gethsemane, but pretty tempting nonetheless. An account. No, not a story. An account, possibly presented to the disciples just after the execution of John the Baptist, or just before that pivotal Garden of Gethsemane event. Such timing would lend both relevance and heightened memorability to this cosmic account. An account possibly shared to them in the third person. Perhaps shared to them in the sense that after the Son of Man came from John, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. An account that Matthew likely got more right than Luke did, getting those events listed in the proper order, with that cosmic exchange finally ending with, "Away from me, Satan." To that end, Matthew closes with the serving temptation of those three, much as he closes his book with a serving the Messiah agenda, a messiahship that was nowhere in view in these temptations, so certainly not a perfect parallel. Whereas Luke likes to close with the actual temptation agenda in question. He likes to close with the second temptation. Close with the agenda that got us into trouble in the first place. Close with the agenda of unbelief that got Adam and Eve into trouble in the first place. Regardless, the facts remain the same. They are just in different chronological order. And Luke uses grammar that is not all that specific to the chronology anyway. He does not use the typical then word, a word that Matthew uses 89 times in his book, whereas Luke only uses it 15 times. You see that comparison here that I grabbed from my Bible Works program. But what is really, really freaky in this account is the teleportation thing that's happening here. Sort of a Star Trek thing happening here. Like, beam me up, Satan, right? A thing where Jesus and Satan are doing some long distance and high altitude tripping. High energy tripping after what was most likely a voluntary fast. A voluntary starving of himself just to amplify the upcoming temptation. Excuse me. Yes, a most unlikely, a most unlikely pair of tourists cruising around the continents, with Jesus even being dared to do some bungee jumping at one penultimate point. Well, Calvin really disappoints me here, suggesting that some of those temptation things might have been an illusion, as if Jesus was merely hallucinating from a lack of food and rest or something. Something that sometimes happens, but not always. Presumably only an illusion, since it is simply not possible to see all the kingdoms of the world from some existing mountain. An awfully grand illusion, since it would take an awfully long time to show Jesus even a fraction of their splendor. And Calvin maintains that Satan produced this effect upon his eyes, as in a faddish crystal ball. Oh, crystal ball. Or as in those seeing stones used in Lord of the Rings. Or as in a magic mirror used in Snow White. Or perhaps something as simple as a water bowl, which the Witch of Endor, which you might read in 1 Samuel 28, may have used. A pretty mystical suggestion of illusion, right? Pretty disappointing suggestion, right? Well, disappointing unless you are able to grant a very real time and real space component to that mountaintop experience. Unless you're able to grant a mountain view experience from some place called Mountain View. A city in California quite aptly named Mountain View, since it has a view of the Santa Cruz Mountains to the west and a view of the Diablo Mountains to the east. A city that is the worldwide headquarters of Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, to name a few. The home of mountains and megastars, virtual reality and Google Glasses. Oh, Google Glasses, huh? So a pretty viable experience now, but not back then, right? Huh? Well, hardly. Yeah. Seems Calvin was really, really before his time. Yet, away from all that ancient scrying, which they call this crystal ball stuff, and on to the fulfillment, right? Let's get on to this fulfillment, since that seems to be our ongoing theme here. Now, this fulfillment of verse 15 seems pretty casual at first glance, right? This semi-casual Galilee of the Gentiles. It sounds about as boring as the land of Zebulon and Naphtali and Jordan sound, right? Well, it's not. Not to Matthew at any rate. So you should probably be asking yourself something like, well, what do you mean by Galilee of the Gentiles there, Matthew? Why is this so crazy significant to you? Well, from a cursory reading of our text, it means very, very little. But as our investigative scholar, Michael Heiser, suggests from the book The Bible Unfiltered, if you're reading the Bible that semi-casually, then you're cheating yourself terribly. You're cheating yourself like most Christians do, unfortunately. You're only taking lukewarm comfort in the general story and not in the specifics that directly relate to you. And Heiser continues that casual reading, that he continues by saying that the casual reading, reciting, and even memorizing is in no way diligent Bible study. That is not being a proper Berean. That is not thoroughly mining the diamonds that freaked out Luke and those hillbilly Bereans way back in Acts 17:11. Or that freaked out Matthew with this particular fulfillment, for that matter. It freaked out Matthew since he was a half-hearted Jew from Capernaum, from an area of half-hearted Jews. So it would seem unthinkable that the Messiah would come and frequent his area instead of the more wholehearted Jerusalem. Unthinkable that the Messiah would frequent an area almost out of Israel altogether, that the Messiah would frequent a predominantly Gentile province, which was originally assigned to the sons of Naphtali, that he would frequent what is currently the northernmost province of Israel, if you don't count those contentious Golan Heights, which not many people do anymore. That the Messiah would live and move about in a place where Matthew was collecting taxes from fellow Jews for sure, but mostly collecting taxes from Gentiles, collecting from those Canaanites that had settled there ages ago. You can read about that there. Canaanites that were supposed to be driven out by those Jews earlier in the time of Joshua. Those Gentiles that had settled there in mass from Syria as well as from Assyria after those unfaithful Jews were exiled to the other side of the Jordan. To the other side of the Jordan. It's unthinkable that the Messiah would live and minister in such a mixed people as those in Capernaum, in an area even further away from the Messiah's pure birthplace of Bethlehem, and so far away from his sleepy hometown of Nazareth. But in a way, that distance makes perfect sense, doesn't it? You see a hockey player or a gold medal skater like from Milderton or something or whatever might be duly honored in their hometown. However, a prophet is never truly honored in their own hometown now, are they? Matthew states that in chapter 13 and in 23 and his 23rd chapter as well. Not even honored by his very own family, as you may recall when we studied the book of John a while back. And it's not because those prophets often dress funny. Folks simply don't like the ethical component of prophecy. They don't like being told who, when, and how to worship. However, we will eventually see where Matthew is going with this Galilee of the Gentiles comment in his final chapter. That this Galilee comment runs parallel with that pervasive kingdom of heaven comment once again. A comment of judgment, judgment, judgment. Where we will see Jesus will eventually be honored by all the nations, whether they like it or not. Once again, this manifestation of the Messiah in the province of Galilee was a fulfillment prophesied long before by the not-so-popular prophet Messiah. A somewhat convoluted fulfillment of Isaiah 9, a hugely messianic chapter. A prophecy convoluted enough so that a shallow Jewish Westerner would have thought that he would find the Messiah coming from the opposite side of the Jordan. Yeah, coming from the side where he humbled the land of Zebulun and Naphtali centuries earlier. Coming from the Assyrian side of the Jordan River. So, here the shallow Jewish Westerner would expect the Messiah to be coming from the east side of the Jordan, since so many Western mystics look to the east. Don't they, doobies? Looking for a surprise conqueror of oppressive Rome from a revitalized East, Manasseh, perhaps. Revised a little earlier by those intrepid warriors, the Maccabee boys. Sounds like a cool boy band, huh? Or even looking for a surprise conqueror from Eastern Reuben or from Gad, by God. Yeah, you see that? There's Gad. Oh, there's Reuben. and Manasseh. These are pretty good pictures for you. Pretty good. There's your Nazareth, Galilee, Capernaum. So, definitely not a Messiah from the more western area of Galilee, Naphtali, Zebulun, from an area that was soundly punished and exiled for the pagan practice of necromancy, of contacting the dead. An area that adopted the gods of the immigrants, much less a Messiah from the little-known town of Nazareth, which is at a convergence point of Naphtali and Zebulun, right in there. A convergence point, perhaps resulting in the Nazareth name being a conflation of Naphtali and Zebulun. A town which was a little more than a brief pit stop on a busy route to the Mediterranean. Brief pit stop. The Great Sea. Pit stop to the Great Sea. Mentioned in that opening verse of Isaiah 9. The Sea of Galilee, well, it pales in comparison. It is merely a spittoon. However, a proper reading might indicate that Isaiah's perspective was siding with Assyria rather than with Israel at the time that he wrote this prophecy. Isaiah was siding very strongly against those mediums and spiritists that we read about in Isaiah 8, calling down curses on that land that would not expel those immigrants and foreign practices. And there's a pretty good chance that Isaiah may have been living on the east side of the Jordan at the time in order to avoid execution. Remember how much they like prophets, huh? So east and west has a different matter of perspective on the other side of the Jordan now, doesn't it? It points to the west side now. To that end, we see that Jesus moved to Capernaum, to a bit of a crossroads at the northernmost tip of the Sea of Galilee. Right at the tip there. Right at the tip there. He moved from the anonymous town of Nazareth, with a population of about 600, to the good-sized city of Capernaum, with a population of about 10,000, which was more of a neutral area. And while there, he proceeded to heal all manner of illness, which is not to heal all the illness that plagued that good-sized city of Capernaum. No, we have discussed that all anomaly numerous times, right? That would be to heal an enormous amount of people there. And that simply didn't happen. Just like it didn't happen in nearby Nazareth. Or happen with 5,000 people in nearby Tiberias. Either. There's Tiberias. There. Simply didn't happen. Not only that, contrary to our standard psychological textbook, unbelief in God is a legitimate illness, mental illness too. Yep. A mental illness that comes in a multitude of shapes and sizes. An illness not so readily healed, not even in disciples, it seems. And then while in Capernaum, Jesus taught them about the kingdom of heaven, verse 17 of our chapter, which, as we discussed earlier, invariably means taught them about the judgment of God. Once again, that invariably means wrath, wrath, wrath. Unless there is repentance and belief involved. The primary message of Jesus and John, etc., etc., etc. And overwhelming belief simply didn't happen in Capernaum or Nazareth or Jerusalem whatsoever. As a final item of note, then, where it is said that Jesus was teaching in their synagogues, verse 23, it doesn't necessarily mean teaching in a brick and mortar temple. It merely means teaching an assembly of folks. Keep that in mind next time someone tells you, quizzers, that you must go to a brick and mortar church every Sunday in order to be taught using Hebrews 10 verse 25 as a fancy pretext. No. Zoom and Facebook are legitimate assemblies as well, just a whole lot more superficial, a whole lot more transient and virtual. A virtual reality like Google Glasses. Whoa. Assemblies with a whole lot less discipline. Oh, not my. They're not virtual reality. There's homes. Oh. Assemblies with a whole lot less discipline, like me sometimes, and with a whole lot less intimacy as well. Is that what you really want? Is that what you really, really want? Well, then maybe you want the Spice Girls instead.